Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into a crisis that pushed the entire world right to the edge of a catastrophe, and the incredible reversal that followed, all in just a few days. We're talking about a fragile 5-day hope, one that's being measured in barrels of oil and, well, heartbeats. So, it's Saturday, March 21st, and the world wakes up to this. A really stark ultimatum. And let's be clear, the language here, it was not subtle. This wasn't just diplomatic tough talk. This was a direct threat to literally turn the lights off for an entire nation.
And just like that, the clock started ticking. 48 hours. That's it. Enough time for Iran to make a choice that would either cripple the infrastructure for 90 million people or somehow pull the world back from a new, absolutely devastating war. I mean, you really can't overstate the stakes here.
Okay, so the big question is how on earth did we get to this point? To really understand the ultimatum, you have to rewind the clock by about 25 days.
It all really kicked off in late February. You had coordinated U.S. and Israeli strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader. And Tehran's response? It was fast. They hit back where they knew it would hurt the most, the world's oil lifeline, the Strait of Hormuz. And believe me, the global economy felt that squeeze almost immediately. And you can see the result right here. The economic impact was just, bam, immediate. Oil prices shot up from a pretty manageable $85 a barrel to a crippling $113. Now, that's not just a number on a chart. That's a blinking red light warning of a full-blown global energy crisis. And this number, this really tells the story of the chokehold Iran put on the world. Shipping through that waterway collapsed by 97%. It went from about 141 ships a day down to just a handful. Think about that for a second. The world's most critical sea lane was, for all intents and purposes, closed for business. All right, so let's fast forward to Monday morning. The whole world is basically holding its breath, waiting for impact. And then, just hours before that deadline was set to expire, everything flipped on its head. In a post on social media, President Trump announces this unbelievable reversal. He talks about having very good and productive conversations, and because of them, he's postponing all military action for 5 days. And you could almost hear the entire world let out one huge collective sigh of relief. I mean, what a whiplash. We went from the absolute threat of obliteration to the possibility of actual dialogue, seemingly overnight. The change in tone could not have been more dramatic. And the markets, they reacted instantly. Brent crude, that international benchmark that had spiked to $113, plummeted more than 14% in just a few hours. That right there, that's the sound of the world economy taking a big step back from a very, very steep cliff.
So to put a lid on the panic, the U.S. and its allies did something huge. They decided to flood the market with oil. The U.S. Treasury put out a temporary sanctions waiver, and the International Energy Agency promised the biggest release of emergency reserves in history. The goal is simple: take the pressure off and fast.
Okay, but this is where the story takes a really weird turn. Because when you ask why all this happened, why the strikes were paused, you get two completely different, totally contradictory stories from Washington and Tehran. On the one hand, you have the U.S. claiming this major diplomatic breakthrough. On the other, you have Iranian state media just flat out denying it, saying, and this is a quote, "There are no talks between Tehran and Washington." So what's the real story? So what was really going on? Well, the most likely answer is a classic diplomatic move called shuttle diplomacy. It's an old school trick, right? You've got two sides that refuse to even be in the same room, but they have a mutual friend. So that friend literally runs back and forth, carrying messages, negotiating terms. In this case, countries like Egypt and Qatar were reportedly playing that role, letting the U.S. and Iran talk without actually talking. But here's the thing. While all these diplomats were running back and forth, the real mediator, the most powerful voice in the room, it wasn't a person at all. It was fear. Pure, simple economic terror. The thought of $150 a barrel oil tipping a fragile world economy into a full-blown depression, that fear forced everyone to the table, even if they wouldn't admit they were there. But even with this pause, even though things have cooled down for now, this whole crisis has created a really dangerous new reality for the global economy, and it's one that's going to stick around long after these 5 days are over. Think about it like this. For 3 solid weeks, Iran proved it could turn the Strait of Hormuz into its own private toll road. They would let ships from some countries, like India or Turkey, go through while completely blocking ships from the US and its allies. They've shown the world they have this power, and now everyone knows they can flip that switch again anytime they want. And if you want to see just how massive the gap between these two sides really is, just look at this list. Washington wants an end to uranium enrichment, missile development, funding for proxy groups, the whole shebang. And Tehran? They're asking for $800 billion in reparations, all sanctions lifted immediately, and a complete U.S. withdrawal from the region. That is not a small gap to bridge. So this all brings us to the one question that really, really matters now. What happens when this 5-day clock runs out? Is this a real shot at peace or just a temporary timeout in a much bigger fight? Because let's be honest, the situation on the ground is anything but calm. Even as this pause was announced, missiles were still in the air. We heard reports of new strikes in Tehran, and the conflicts across the region are still absolutely raging. This is not a ceasefire in any real sense of the word. So, is this 120-hour window a genuine opening, a chance to build something real? Or is it just the quiet before an even bigger, even more dangerous storm? You know, a conversation, even one that's being denied, it's not peace. Not even close. But if you look back through history, at all the conflicts that seemed hopeless but eventually ended, a conversation is almost always the thing that came just before it. For now, the world just watches the clock and waits.